My name's Matt Wilson. I'm the General Manager of the Controls Business Unit, and this is Jeff Morris. He's the Engineering Manager here at the Controls Business Unit. Today, we wanted to talk about a couple of different things, but the main purpose of the discussion is to review some industry tire management trends. There's a lot going on in the industry right now in terms of what's the best way to manage tires. Tires are very expensive for fleets, so they're always looking for a little bit of an edge. And how can I get better tire performance or even potentially better vehicle performance by managing my tires better? So we want to talk about those industry trends. And then we're going to introduce an exciting new product from Hendrickson called TIREMAAX Pro LB. The LB stands for load-based. I don't want to give away all of the information that we're going to go through in the discussion, but it's a pretty cool new product from us, and we'd like to cover some of the basics on how it works and why it's important to fleets. And then at the end, we're going to take and cover a few frequently asked questions. So we've been getting some questions from our customers, both OEM customers and fleet users, in terms of how the system works and why it's important to them. So we've got some questions that we'd like to review concerning those. Starting out, let's get into some of the industry trends. So if you look at listen to a lot of the industry buzz, whether it's SAE or TMC or even just some of the large fleets, what you'll find is there's a lot of talk about tires and what the tire pressure should be as the load on a trailer changes. And it's a lot different than what you would see with a typical car. So people are trying to figure out what's the best way moving forward to manage tires. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about why is that? What's important? Why would somebody even want or care to change the tire pressure on a heavy duty vehicle like a trailer? Jeff, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, right, Matt. So as you know, the air in the tire is what carries the load. So having the right pressure in the tire at any given time is really important to make sure that performance is optimized, that the tires get as much life as the fleet can out of them. So as you mentioned, unlike automobiles, which have a pretty constant load throughout their life or their operation, trailers can see a wide variety or wide variation in that axle load. And that can be dependent on the trailer type, the type of cargo that they're hauling, how the cargo is loaded. A number of different factors affect that. Tire manufacturers will publish load inflation tables that kind of help a fleet decide what is the right pressure to put in their tires based on their operation. But really it still forces them to pick a pressure for any given operation. So as they deploy a trailer into an operation, they have to pick a pressure that they think will carry the load that they might expect to see at any given time in that trailer's life. So they don't get to change that on a daily basis. That's where Hendrickson's TIREMAAX Pro LB system comes. We developed that to allow it to automatically adjust tire pressure for any given load condition that the trailer might see.
And then, if you kind of think through why is that important to a fleet and what types of fleets might care about it, it's because there's a lot of different types of fleet operations in the world, and there's a number of types of fleets and operations that require or would experience widely varying loads. So if you look at, for example, a regional grocery hauler might leave in the morning fully loaded, have a bunch of stops, and take a lot of load off and then come back empty that night. The same with a tank operation. So typically tankers are dedicated hauls where the tank is completely full or it's completely empty. So really 50% of the duty cycle of the trailer, they're completely empty. LTL fleets is another example where an LTL operator, it's even, maybe even worse for them because I think, often an LTL operator doesn't know what they're going to carry during a given day. So they're picking up different loads or, from a day in, day out basis, depending on what their customers have to ship and where they're picking up and where they can get backhauls. There's a lot of variation in an LTL operation in terms of what the overall trailer load looks like. So, I think those are great applications where a fleet doesn't really know or understand what their average trailer weight is going to be over time. So giving those fleets the opportunity to dynamically change the tire pressure really can have a nice positive impact on their overall tire program. So as we've been talking about already, fleets have certain applications where their load varies widely and it might make sense for them to change their tire pressure. But why is that even important? So I'd like Jeff to talk a little bit about why it's important with a heavy duty trailer to maintain an optimum tire pressure across all these loading conditions.
Yeah, right, Matt. So we talked a little bit about the load inflation tables that tire manufacturers provide for fleets, but those really are just a starting point to help them start their tire pressure management program. So really, when you want to maximize tread life, what you need to do is optimize the contact patch between the road and the tire. So having full uniform contact between the tire and the road, something that doesn't have areas where you have light contact or tires starting to lift sooner than other parts of the tires. That's really what generally leads to accelerated wear in those sections, and eventually leads to replacement of the tire due to accelerated wear. So if you can imagine a tire that's inflated to 100 psi when it's loaded, you may have a nice uniform contact patch at 17,000 pounds on that axle, but if you take the load off and you're down to 3,000 pounds on the axle, that contact patch is not going to be the same. You're going to see some areas where you don't have good contact, and those are generally areas where you start to see accelerated wear. And really, this is especially important on trailer axles or trailer tires, where they're rolling down the road, straight down the road for most of their life. You don't get the traction forces or steer forces that can scrub off some of those irregularities and generally make the tread live longer overall.
I assume that this also has an impact on vehicle performance. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you think about race car engineers spend a lot of time trying to dial in the correct pressure to optimize or maximize the performance of their car. The same applies to a trailer tire or a heavy truck tire in general. If you have the best pressure in the tire for performance, you're going to overall improve the performance of that vehicle and maximize other things as well beyond just the tread life.
Perfect. I think all these factors, went into the design and development of TIREMAAX Pro LB. Hendrickson's got extensive field experience with tire inflation systems in general. So we have, well over 500,000 vehicles in the world today that have our tire inflation system on them. So what we did is we took, that existing technology and experience that we have in the field and tried to build upon that to create, the next generation of tire inflation system for us, and to try to bring some of these features and advantages to the marketplace, because we really saw a need as we talked to fleets. We tried to figure out what are the things that we could do as an expert in the development of tire inflation systems. What could we do to make these systems function even better? So all of those things that Jeff just talked about, were considered as we developed the TIREMAAX Pro LB system. So we've talked a little bit about why it's important to a fleet or why they would want to change their tire pressure, but I'd like to get into TIREMAAX Pro LB functionality and how, what the system does and how does it actually change your tire pressure and what does it look like under different operating conditions. I think this would be something good for Jeff to review. Just explain, the function of TIREMAAX Pro LB during different loading conditions.
Yeah, sure, Matt. So TIREMAAX Pro LB, when the trailer is fully loaded, will act just like TIREMAAX Pro. It'll provide full pressure that the fleet has targeted as their desired running pressure. So for instance, if they're running 95 psi in the TIREMAAX Pro system, when the trailer is fully loaded, TIREMAAX Pro LB will also provide 95 psi. It's when load comes off of that trailer, when it's lightly loaded, that the Pro LB system will start to reduce pressure in the tires and optimize that pressure based on whatever the load is and automatically adjust for that. It's based on whatever it sees in the air springs. The pressure is a pilot into the controller. So if you can imagine an empty trailer, you may only see 10 or 15 psi in the air springs at that time. We don't want the tires to completely follow that pressure all the way down to a dangerously low pressure. So we've built in some safeguards that limit the lower pressure of the tires to something that stays within the tire manufacturer recommendation. So they're always running at a pressure that can carry the load that is optimized for the load that the trailer sees.
Yeah, then maybe we can get into the technology a little bit. So, that's the function, but what are some of the key technology changes that had to be made to allow TIREMAAX Pro LB to do the things that it does that are a little bit different than TIREMAAX Pro?
Yeah, sure. So, it is built on proven technology of TIREMAAX Pro. As you mentioned, we've got hundreds of thousands of units in the field that are running successfully today. And it really provided the foundation, the inflate, the relieve, the equalize functionality that's needed to make a load-based system work. So all of the components that we've already got, the hubcaps and all these other things, are already there to allow the system to automatically adjust pressures up and down. What the load-based system brings to us is a new controller that uses an air spring pilot pressure to determine what load is on the axle at any given time, and then it adjusts the output pressure based on that load. Pilot-operated regulators are not something new. It's technology that exists. But what's new about it is the way we've incorporated it into this application. And we've really got some slick features, as I mentioned, to limit what the lower pressure of those tires actually are. So we set a minimum pressure that keeps tires in a recommended pressure range, and that's incorporated into this mechanical regulator design.
You talk about the wheel end equipment a little bit. So, TIREMAAX has a specific hubcap that's required to allow these features to happen. So TIREMAAX Pro's got a hubcap that's got some special valves inside it. Jeff, what's the difference between the technology that goes into the TIREMAAX Pro hubcap, and is there any concern that the Pro LB hubcap wouldn't be as durable because it's different or unique?
Actually, Matt, the technology is exactly the same. It's the same components. We have a little different process for setting the hubcaps, but other than that, it's the same technology that we use today. So we're pretty confident that the durability of those components will be equivalent to what we've seen in the field with the TIREMAAX Pro.
Great. One of the things that we run into a lot is, who determines the tire pressure that a fleet should operate their tires at, and how does that work as we move into this new design where the system can actually change your tire pressure. So one of the things that we want to make sure people understand is we still want the fleet to specify what their fully loaded operating pressure should be. Fleets have been trying to dial in and figure out for many, many years what is the optimum pressure to run their tires at for a fully loaded application. So the way TIREMAAX Pro LB works is we don't want to take that away from the fleet. So we still want the fleet to tell us, here's what my fully loaded operating pressure should be, because they really are the experts on that. And then as the trailer moves off of that fully loaded condition, then the system will take over and adjust the pressure accordingly. We'd like to go through a few frequently asked questions that we hear often about TIREMAAX Pro LB. The first one is, will TIREMAAX Pro LB replace the current Hendrickson tire inflation systems? At this point, that's not the plan. So as a lot of people know, we already have a couple of different versions of automatic tire inflation systems here at Hendrickson. And the reason we still have multiple tire inflation systems is, depending on the fleet's application, some of these benefits may or may not be useful to them. And we feel the same thing about TIREMAAX Pro LB. It's probably a perfect fit for some fleets because they get a lot of empty or lightly loaded miles. For others, it might not make sense. So at least at this point in time, there are no plans to reduce or eliminate the current TIREMAAX offerings that Hendrickson provides. Another question that comes up frequently is, does TIREMAAX Pro LB individually monitor all the tire pressures of your tires? And I think the reason we get that a lot, at least currently, is there's a lot of trailers today that that are able to collect data from either tire pressure monitoring systems or other systems on the trailer that generate data. And TIREMAAX Pro LB in and of itself doesn't do that. So the TIREMAAX Pro LB system is very similar to the other automatic tire inflation systems that Hendrickson offers, in that it provides a general system status, but it doesn't actively monitor the current pressure in all of the tires. However, Hendrickson is working on another new product called the Watchman wheel end sensor that will do exactly that. And so that's the big differentiation between an automatic tire inflation system, ATIS, and a tire pressure monitoring system, TPMS. And Hendrickson, up until now, has only offered automatic tire inflation systems, but early next year we plan to launch the Watchman wheel end sensor that essentially provides that additional level of functionality. So the Watchman wheel end sensor is a TPMS system that will monitor all of the individual tire pressures, collect that data, and be able to share it to a telematics system that eventually can get transmitted back to the fleet home office, so they can do even further tire analysis and try to understand their tire condition even better and more than what they do today. So that leads to usually some follow-up questions. Is Watchman available with all of the Hendrickson tire inflation systems? Do you have to buy a Watchman system when you buy a TIREMAAX tire inflation system? And so the answer is no. You don't have to get the Watchman system with TIREMAAX. So the Watchman system will be an additional feature and benefit above the standard tire inflation system. So if you want to add that to your standard TIREMAAX Pro or TIREMAAX Pro LB tire inflation system, you are able to specify Watchman and get the additional functionality, but you don't have to. It really is kind of fleet dependent, and it really depends on what kind of information and data the fleet feels is best to help monitor their tires. On the flip side, if you want Hendrickson's Watchman wheel end sensor, it must be paired with one of the existing TIREMAAX Pro or TIREMAAX Pro LB systems. It doesn't work with every Hendrickson tire inflation system, but it works with the Pro family of tire inflation systems. Another commonly asked question is about the complexity of TIREMAAX Pro LB. So it sounds very complicated, and the question we get often is, did Hendrickson move to a fully electronic system, or did we need to move to a fully electronic system to provide these features and benefits? So, yeah, Jeff, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, actually no, TIREMAAX Pro LB does not utilize a electronic controller. Instead of electronics, we've put all of our technology into a advanced mechanical controller. It does not require power to operate. So we'll see wires here. There is electric power required to drive the warning light on the front of the trailer, but the system will work whether or not there's power to the trailer or not. It will still perform its full function of inflating, relieving, adjusting tire pressure, regardless of the power condition of the trailer.
Great. Another thing that has come up multiple times is, what's the compatibility of TIREMAAX Pro LB with Hendrickson suspension? So, are there certain suspensions that it's not recommended for? So, Jeff, could you kind of walk through that a little bit? Like, where do we anticipate TIREMAAX Pro LB being used, and are there some areas where maybe it shouldn't be paired?
Yeah, good question, Matt. TIREMAAX Pro LB does require us to know what suspension system it's being installed with. We need to know what air springs, what the load configuration of that suspension is, so that we can tune it to work correctly and provide the correct tire pressure in operation. So that being said, it does work with most of our integrated axle products, such as Intrax, Fantrax, Ultra K. Where it doesn't work so well, where we're not able to provide that product, is into the loose axle products, where those might get married with another Hendrickson suspension or even a competitor suspension. We don't really know what that suspension will be, so we can't really set the system up correctly to work in those situations.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that concludes our question and answer period. If there's some questions that do come up that you think of after watching the video, please feel free to reach out to your Hendrickson sales representative, and they can help you walk through any additional questions that you might have.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. I hope this was informative.
Thanks, everybody.
Refer to the following for more information on TIREMAAX Pro LB.